The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Good morning, this is Arlene.
Hi, good morning, this is Gowri.
And you're with us on our Durian Heat, where we bring critical analysis on Southeast Asian matters. This time we want to put our focus on North Korea. And the question is, can ASEAN contain North Korea, or in this case Pyongyang?
Of course.
What do you think, Gowri?
Well, I think North Korea is a very scary country, and
well, to an outsider's point of view.
yeah, that's right, and also quite they're sort of intimidating a lot of countries right now, not only in Southeast Asia but all around the world, including the U.S.
And with the recent hydrogen bomb test that countries are alleging that North Korea is responsible, we would like to get an expert's point of view on this. Dr. Tan Erwin, he is the senior lecturer of the Department of International and Strategic Studies of Universiti Malaya, and he'll be sharing with us. First of all, I want to say hi. How are you?
Good morning.
Good
Yes,
morning.
good morning.
Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, good morning. Yes, I'd like to begin by saying that I would say I'm somewhat skeptical about the North Korean claims about the hydrogen bomb, and in fact, the skepticism is shared by several other analysts and scholars of North Korea, because important thing to bear in mind is that there are many different types of nuclear bombs. You see? The first is called fission bombs, which is the type that was exploded over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Basically, fission bombs create an explosion by splitting the nuclei of heavy atoms in order to release explosive energy. In contrast, a fusion device, which is the basis for a hydrogen bomb, is a lot more powerful, and it's based on the collision of two or more atomic particles. This leads to a two-stage nuclear chain reaction, and the result is that based on the seismic readings of the recent explosion in North Korea, there's a lot of grounds to suggest skepticism about this. Just a very quick review of the impact of various nuclear bombs in the past. The atomic bombs exploded over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945 had the estimated equivalent of 15 kilotons of TNT, whereas the hydrogen bomb, say the Castle Bravo tested by the U.S. in 1952, had 15 megatons, which is about 1,000 times more explosive, so that's the basis of a hydrogen bomb. Now, if you look at the actual seismic readings of the 2016 North Korean nuclear tests, they estimated to be about 5.1 on the Richter scale, which is actually very similar to the previous North Korean nuclear tests in 2006, 2009, and 2013. This in turn means that we are talking about a yield of maybe 7 kilotons, which is far, far, far less than what would be an actual hydrogen bomb explosion. In this sense, the thing with the North Koreans is that this is in fact a very long-standing track record of North Korea. They have a habit of exaggerating their claims in order to increase the extent of their negotiating leverage.
So you won't even call this bombing. You call this just a hydrogen.
It was a nuclear bomb of some type, but not a hydrogen bomb.
Ah, okay. I mean, why they are doing this in the first place? A lot of people are questioning this.
Well, I'd like to digress very briefly. Are you familiar with the madman theory?
Not really, but you can explain.
Yes, the madman theory was first developed by President Nixon during the Vietnam War. It was basically a political strategy of negotiation in order to convince the North Vietnamese government and the Soviet Union that Nixon was crazy enough to use nuclear weapons to bring the war to an end. So I'm quoting here from Nixon. I call it the madman theory. I want the North Vietnamese to believe I've reached a point where I might do anything to stop the war. We'll just slip the word to them that, Nixon is obsessed about communism, we can't restrain him when he's angry, and he has his hand on the nuclear button. So, unquote. So the whole idea is to convince the opponent that one is crazy enough to use a nuclear weapon as a form of a negotiating leverage, you see?
But in reality, even if you are talking about a country like North Korea, there are different level of decision making that would affect Kim Jong-un's decision making. It's not just him alone. Or is it the case that he actually had the absolute power to decide?
Well, I'll take a step back. So what I'm trying to say about the madman theory is that it's actually a very long-standing North Korean negotiating tactic. One American scholar I spoke to had this to say in his book, that North Korea has a tendency to use so-called brinkmanship diplomacy. basically in order to, deliberately provoking a crisis in order to create an atmosphere that's conducive to the North Korean negotiating objectives. So I'm quoting here from Scott Snyder's Negotiating on the Edge. The mixing of aggressive and provocative tactics, including issuing unconditional demands, blustering, bluffing, threatening, stalling, manufacturing deadlines, and even walking out of negotiations. So in this sense, no, I don't. I mean, the mass media like to portray North Korea as irrational and crazy, but I don't quite agree with it. It's a case of North Korea pretending to look irrational in order to increase the extent of its leverage over Seoul and Washington.
Can you tell us the indicators that you sense that they were just pretending? They were not really serious at threatening countries, especially South Korea.
Well, take a look at the North Korean statements that accompanied the nuclear test that happened a couple of weeks earlier. Yeah, let me see. Okay, I'm quoting here from the North Korean news agency, quoting, "If there's no invasion on our sovereignty, we will not use nuclear weapon." Yeah. So if you look at the track record of North Korea's perception of threats of attack that have been raised against it, I think it's fair to say that the North Koreans actually have reasons to be fearful for their own security. If you look at according to another scholar I know, the North Korea has been threatened with nuclear attack by the U.S. more times than any other adversary of the U.S. Yeah. I mean, back in the 1950s, in 1968, 70s, 93, 94, and 2002, the U.S. has made repeated implicit claims of its willingness to attack North Korea with nuclear weapons. So in this sense, then, I would say that North Korea has this tendency to exaggerate the extent of its military capabilities in a bid to... It's essentially a bluff against the U.S., yeah?
A bluff.
Yeah.
Why do you think that they keep doing that? Why do they find the need to intimidate other countries?
Well, like I said, it's partly because of the extent to which the North Koreans have borrowed from their own historical culture, yeah? The scholar I mentioned earlier, Scott Snyder, has noted that the North Koreans have apparently borrowed from the nature of their guerrilla strategy against Japanese occupation during the first half of the 20th century. The whole idea is to engage in unconventional tactics in order to increase the unpredictability of the North Korean regime. This, in other words, forces the US and the South Koreans to be a bit more cautious in how they respond. It's a bit because basically the North Koreans are entering into any negotiation with a weak hand. Yeah. So if you are entering a negotiation with a weak hand, you end up having to exploit that weak hand as much as you can. You see?
And let's talk about North Korea, probably best friends, or the only best friends that we can think of, China. Why China also see the recent hydrogen bomb test as a threat by North Korea?
Well, first, another disclaimer. Actually, I would say that China no longer sees the North Koreans as an ally. If you remember the WikiLeaks episode in November of 2010, it's apparent that even China is regarding the North Koreans as a bit of an embarrassing liability due to the extremely unpredictable nature of North Korea and its missile and nuclear tests. Now, that said, the thing with China is that it has two very important relationships it's trying to work on at the moment: Beijing's relations with the U.S. and with Japan. In this sense, then, the unpredictable nature of North Korea means that it's causing a lot of complications and embarrassments for Beijing in its relations with Tokyo and Washington. Yeah? Think of it this way, yeah.
But North Korea's existence rely heavily on China. How is China reacting to this? What have they done to contain Pyongyang?
Well, the thing is this: because the Chinese are in a bit of a spot here, they are trying to manage their relations with Japan and the U.S., even though Japan and the U.S. have reasons to be upset with North Korea. But at the same time, if China pushes too hard against North Korea, and if eventually leading to the collapse of the North Korean regime, then this means a flood of 20 million starving North Korean refugees into China.
Oh, okay.
As it is, there already are many North Koreans who are fleeing across the border into China because of the extent of the food shortages. Yeah. So because of this, the Chinese government wants the North Korean regime to survive in some form, but at the same time is running out of options to deal with North Korea on a constructive level.
So their only threat is they do not want to handle the human rights and the refugees that is coming from North Korea.
Yeah.
I see. Anyway, we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll discuss further on the ASEAN relationship with Pyongyang.
Okay.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hi, welcome back. This is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
You're still with us on the Durian Heat and also with Dr. Tan Erwin. He is the senior lecturer of the Department of International and Strategic Studies in Universiti Malaya. He's going to share with us on the ASEAN relationship with Pyongyang. So far, we don't really know much. I mean, coming from Southeast Asia when it comes to North Korea.
That's right. So maybe Dr. Erwin, you can tell us a little bit about how ASEAN's relationship has been with Pyongyang.
Okay, well, the thing is that I'm a bit of a critic of ASEAN on this, and in this sense, ASEAN has been characterized by several weaknesses. I think I'll just focus on the two of these two weaknesses of ASEAN. One is that there's no centralized policy-making mechanism to set out diplomatic and security policy on behalf of ASEAN. Yeah. The second criticism is that it's essentially hemmed in by the ASEAN way, which emphasizes the consensus among its members. So in this sense, ASEAN is not an EU or a NATO that's able to formulate a coherent foreign and security policy. In a lot of ways, these weaknesses of ASEAN stem from the historical circumstances that framed the founding of ASEAN back in the 60s. Yeah. I mean, remember the Cold War, the fear of communist expansion, which was the priorities of ASEAN, as well as regional instability, which meant that the founding of ASEAN essentially prioritized, establishing some sense of order within the ASEAN region among the founding members of ASEAN: Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Brunei.
So they don't really put whatever that is happening with their neighboring countries, in this case North Korea situation,
Not really.
as a priority, even in their own foreign policy, for ASEAN's foreign policy.
Well, historically, no. I mean, back in the 60s, the focus was more on the conflict in Indochina. Yeah? In this sense, you might say that ASEAN is a bit of a qualified success in providing some level of stability in contrast to the turmoil of the 1950s and 60s. Okay? But at the same time, the thing is that ASEAN members themselves have historically had very little, connection to the Korean Peninsula affairs in terms of political and security matters. There were only two members of ASEAN countries, there was not ASEAN back in the 1950s, but only two countries in the Southeast Asian actually contributed troops to the US-led coalition during the Korean War, these being Thailand and the Philippines. As it was, though, the rest of ASEAN was going through its, the process of decolonization in the 1950s, so they didn't really take much of an interest in this sense.
What about individual ASEAN countries? Let's focus on Malaysia. Do we have a positive relationship with North Korea?
As far as I can see, yes, the relationship is one that's largely positive, although focused more on economic and commercial interaction.
Would it be the same across all Southeast Asian countries?
I'll deal with these one at a time. Okay. First, with regard to Malaysia, it's my understanding that the Malaysia is the only country in the international community to actually allow to have visa-free travel to North Korea, and I understand that quite a number of Malaysians have gone on tourism into North Korea. It's my understanding that there are actually direct flights from Kuala Lumpur to Pyongyang, and in this sense, I understand that there's also the North Koreans themselves also import quite a number of commodities from Malaysia. And there's also a North Korean there's also a restaurant owned by the North Korean government based in Kuala Lumpur itself, the Koryo restaurant. So in this sense, it's largely a positive commercial relationship, based on, mutually shared commercial interests. But I don't see much interest in the political and security elements of the Malaysia-North Korean relationship.
I see.
Yeah.
Across other countries?
Well, if you look at, Burma, they had a bit of a nasty period during the 1980s, because in 1983, North Korean agents conducted a bomb attack in an attempt to assassinate the South Korean president, Chun Doo-hwan, who was visiting Rangoon at the time in 1983. Now, President Chun escaped, but several members of his entourage were killed, along with a number of Burmese government officials, so the relations between Myanmar and North Korea went to decline for a while. And I think this is likely to continue given the, process of democratization in Burma, which is likely to alienate the North Korea even further.
What about the biggest country in Southeast Asia, Indonesia? Do they even care about North Korea in terms of relationship building?
Well, first things first, I am not an Indonesia expert, so I really don't feel comfortable commenting about Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other, a few other countries which I would actually direct attention to would be
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam and Singapore, as well as Thailand and Laos. I did earlier mention the plight of North Korean refugees fleeing famine in North Korea. Well, the thing is that most of them flee into China. Back in the 1990s, their attempts were to reach the South Korean embassy in Beijing to seek political asylum, but the Chinese government has been cracking down on this. So the result is that now most North Korean refugees flee through the Chinese heartland into the border in Laos and then crossing into Thailand, from which they then reach the South Korean embassy in Bangkok to seek political asylum.
I see.
I did a project a while back which also indicates that there are a number of North Korean students studying in Bangkok, although I've not received any concrete data on this one.
I see.
Yeah.
They study in Bangkok as in like being sponsored by their
As far-
government.
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah. What about Singapore and Vietnam?
Well, in the case of Vietnam, the North Korean Air Force deployed a fighter squadron to support the air defense of Vietnam during the Vietnam War, which is quite interesting. In fact, they even have their own cemetery in northern Vietnam.
I see.
Now, there was a bit of a cooling of relations back in the 1990s due to the Vietnamese government's focus on the economic modernization of the country. But what's really interesting the last couple of years is that the North Koreans have been sending an increasing number of delegations to Vietnam to study the Vietnamese program of economic modernization called Doi Moi, which has been underway since 1986. Now, there are some interesting parallels between Vietnam in 1986 and North Korea in the present day. I mean, both are, Vietnam in the 80s was facing a very high level of isolation as well, along with the post-1975 privations of post-conflict reconstruction. So in this sense, there's some evidence that the North Koreans are trying to modify some elements of the Doi Moi program of economic modernization to suit the North Korean reform. So apart from sending large numbers of delegates, the North Korean government has been trying to undertake some elements of this. For instance, the graduated introduction of free market measures, as well as the decentralization of agricultural planning.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Sorry to.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting to see that North Korea, being a communist country, is interested in the free market. How is this happening?
Well, the thing is that we are talking about the establishment of introduction of free market measures, but very limited on a very graduated scale, and also while ensuring that the Workers' Party remains in control of the government. And this is one thing that the Vietnamese government was able to pull off, you see?
I see.
So it's a bit like China back in the 1980s in ensuring authoritarian control over a free market economy, albeit one that's very graduated, one where the party can control the process of reform.
And in case of Singapore, is it also due to economic reason that they have a good relationship?
Similar, yes. In Singapore, there's a non-government organization called the Chosun Exchange. I know the founder of it, in fact, who basically the Chosun Exchange is an NGO based in Singapore that's helping to facilitate the transfer of business management skills to North Korean entrepreneurs through business management workshops. So what they do is that they occasionally fly North Korean entrepreneurs into Singapore to study business management, and some of the fellows at the people at the Chosun Exchange also take trips into Pyongyang to undertake business management workshops. To basically the whole emphasis, again, there's a very interesting similarity between North Korea, Vietnam, and Singapore. In all three processes, the focus is on stimulating the growth of small and medium enterprises in North Korea. Now, I think if we think in terms of small and medium enterprises as the producers of consumer goods to raise the standards of living, I think there's a very clear rationale for this. Consider the poor living standards of North Korea, and I would say that what the North Koreans are trying to do in this sense is to increase the circulation of consumer goods to raise the standards of living, and thereby assure the regime of some level of survival.
I see. Let's go to the political side of ASEAN and Pyongyang's relationship. I want to go back to the early story about the hydrogen bomb test.
Yeah.
Why ASEAN has been mum about this issue?
Well, the thing is that I don't think that ASEAN has really been mum, so to speak, but it's rather been a case of ASEAN having other concerns on its mind, such as the South China Sea, which is directly affecting two of its members, the Philippines and Vietnam, as well as the emergence of China as with its assertive territorial claims in the South China Sea. So I think that's been taking up the ASEAN's attention at the moment. Second is that, as I mentioned earlier, the ASEAN does not really have any historical interest in the political and security dynamics of the Korean Peninsula. That said, the one area that that's probably worth keeping an eye on for the next couple of years is the ASEAN Regional Forum, because the North Korean government has been known to use the ASEAN Regional Forum as a means of contacting the U.S. government, because both North Korea and the U.S. attend the ASEAN Regional Forum as well.
That's true. And do you see ASEAN? I mean, this is a completely another news, another discussion. Say, there's a possibility of North and South Korea reaching out to each other. Do you see ASEAN as, one of the, I guess, available and desirable platform for them?
I think it's a possible one, but then it's going to be difficult because of the extent of the current animosity between the Seoul and Pyongyang. But I think one interesting note then is the position of Singapore as the perception of Singapore as a credible, neutral intermediary. Remember that last year, the representatives from Taiwan and China actually met in Singapore.
Yep.
So in this sense, I would say that Singapore has been trying to position itself as the sort of a diplomatic middleman between the adversary states. So I suppose Singapore might be the one place where they undertake that.
Is there any interest by both parties, North and South Korea, to, I guess, rekindle the sunshine policy, maybe?
I don't see it happening because on the southern side on the South Korean side, there's the perception that they have been diplomatically and security shortchanged. Yeah, because you had the sunshine policy under Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, but then this was followed by North Korea testing its nuclear test in 2006. I would say that nuclear test was really aimed at the U.S., but from the South Korean point of view, is essentially a betrayal of the sunshine policy.
I see.
Now, given that this has been followed by more missile and nuclear tests, the 2013 crisis, and also the landmine incident last year, along with the other episodes in 2010, 2011, I would say that there's no appetite in the South Korean electorate to resume any form of engagement with the North. From the Northern point of view, they also see themselves as having been shortchanged, because they had the South Koreans had the sunshine policy going, but then Lee Myung-bak succeeded Roh Moo-hyun and essentially repudiated the sunshine policy.
I see.
You see?
So there's a lot of things going on.
Yes.
Anyway, we'll take another short break, and when we return, we'll discuss what's Pyongyang's next move.
Okay.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hi, this is Arlene.
Hi, good morning. This is Gowri.
And of course, you're still with us on our Durian Heat. And with us is Dr. Tan Erwin, Senior Lecturer at the Department of International and Strategic Studies in Universiti Malaya, where he's an expert in North Korea affairs. So, Gowri, what's Pyongyang's next move?
Well, it's a bit hard to say. Not just Pyongyang, but all the surrounding countries as well, including ASEAN. It'll be interesting to see what's next in this saga.
So we would like to ask Dr. Erwin, what do you think about this?
Well, I'd like to refer you to a certain political doctrine that was announced by the North Koreans a couple of years earlier called Pyongjin. Now, Pyongjin essentially envisaged the parallel track development of, one, nuclear weapons, and two, alongside economic development at the same time. So in other words, I would say that the announcement of Pyongjin by Kim Jong-un would suggest that the North Korean leadership views the possession of nuclear weapons as the ultimate security guarantee, but at the same time, given the extent of the isolation, and I would say that the North Korean leadership has also seen what happened with the Arab Spring, so they also know that military firepower alone will not suffice in ensuring regime security. Hence the concurrent development of economic modernization alongside nuclear weapons, you see. Now, it seems to me that like I said, the North Koreans apparently view the possession of nuclear weapons as the ultimate security guarantee, because consider the following. Due to its isolation and the very poor state of the North Korean economy, they have no way of acquiring anything new when it comes to conventional military. The North Korean Air Force is equipped with museum pieces like MiG-21s. North Korean Army is equipped with mostly T-55 and T-62 tanks back to the 1960s.
I see.
So if you consider the very modern state of the South Korean military and the U.S. forces in Northeast Asia, the North Koreans essentially view the possession of a nuclear weapon as a strategic equalizer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think this is also further underlined by the North Korean perception that you have constant transitions in the U.S. and South Korean governments, which lead to the adoption of new security policies in Seoul and Washington.
Mm-hmm.
In the U.S., you had the process of engagement that was undertaken by Bill Clinton, but this was followed by the posture of hostility that was adopted by Bush in 2001. In Seoul, you had Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun adopting the Sunshine Policy, but then the Sunshine Policy was repudiated by Lee Myung-bak. So I would say that from the North Korean point of view, I would say that they perceive that no amount of concessions that is offered from North Korea would suffice in building any level of trust with the U.S. and the South Koreans. Yeah?
That's true. But at the same time, do you see, Pyongyang not using either hydrogen bomb or atomic bomb or any other nuclear weaponry as part of their balancing of power policy?
Do you mean in terms of deterrence or in terms of actual warfare?
Deterrence.
I would say that it's essentially become the basis for deterrence against overwhelming U.S. and South Korean military firepower.
Mm-hmm.
Because another side note is that if you compare North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons with the three countries which were persuaded by the international community to give up nuclear weapons, the three countries which I have in mind are Iraq, Libya, and the Ukraine. Yeah. Now, Iraq under Saddam Hussein was unable to get nuclear weapons. They got invaded by Bush. Gaddafi in Libya was persuaded to give up his nuclear weapons, and he's now out of power. Ukraine inherited some nuclear weapons following the breakup of the Soviet Union, but now it's being invaded by Russia. You see? So if from the North Korean point of view, they now regard nuclear weapons as the ultimate guarantee for their own security.
Mm-hmm.
But this also presents a concurrent problem because from the point of view of the U.S., South Korea, and Japan, the North Korean possession of nuclear weapons itself becomes a non-starter for any kind of negotiation.
That's true. So I guess it's a catch-22 situation.
Yes.
It's either you bring down your nuclear weapon, or you might get attacked for not having any nuclear weapon to protect yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about ASEAN? Do you foresee ASEAN making North Korea as part of their foreign policy?
Not in the path of ASEAN as a unified organization because, like I said, there's no centralized policy making mechanism within ASEAN. I would say that in terms of ASEAN's relations with North Korea, I think it'd be more useful to look at in terms of the actual direct bilateral relations between ASEAN members with North Korea itself.
Mm-hmm. So in the future, let's say in the next 5 years, do you see ASEAN engaging more robustly with North Korea, maybe on the economic side?
I think this is a possibility, but then even this is still going to be limited because I mentioned earlier the two countries which have the most economic relations with North Korea being Vietnam and Singapore, but the thing with Vietnam is that now they are moving closer towards the U.S. in order to balance against China, and so I'm wondering, it's unclear as to whether this will affect Vietnam's relations with North Korea. Singapore is also unofficially an ally of the U.S., and also wanting to hedge against the rise of China in the South China Sea. So it's also unclear where Singapore will stand on North Korea after this. So also the other factor is also to consider who will win the U.S. election later this year.
If there is any future threats by North Korea against South Korea, do you see ASEAN making a stand against North Korea?
Yeah, I think it's very likely that there'll be. It's basically impossible for ASEAN to remain aloof in the event of a North Korean invasion of the South. But I would say, I think this goes back to a point I raised earlier, that the North Korean government likes to pretend it's rational, but they're not irrational.
Mm-hmm.
They know that any invasion of the South or any use of nuclear weapons will lead to U.S. retaliation that brings about the complete downfall of the North Korean regime.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all from us, and it's a pleasure having you at Durian ASEAN.
No problem.
Thank you.
Take care and have a good day.